Okay, let's get into this. Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take these incredibly complex global stories, cut through all the noise, and really just hand you the insights you need to be properly informed.
And today, we are tackling a figure who is, well, she's almost a study in political tragedy.
Aung San Suu Kyi. Her story is just defined by these whiplash-inducing reversals of fortune. It's almost unbelievable when you lay it all out.
It really is. I mean, you have the full spectrum. She starts as the daughter of the father of the nation. Then she becomes the world's most famous political prisoner, a Nobel Peace Laureate.
The icon of democracy.
The absolute icon, only to then, find herself leading a government that's being accused of complicity in genocide. And then the final turn.
She's right back where she started. A political prisoner locked away by the same military she once seemed to have overcome.
It is a dizzying trajectory, to say the least.
And that's our mission today for you, the learner. We're going to use the sources we have to trace that path step by step. We need to understand not just what happened, but maybe get a sense of the political calculations, the pressures that took her from this global beacon of democracy to, well, an international pariah, and then back into the military's grip.
And before we even jump into the timeline, there's some really crucial context we have to establish, and it starts with her name.
Right. It's a uniquely Burmese structure, and it's a key to understanding her connection to the nation's history, isn't it?
It is. We see the name Aung San Suu Kyi, and it feels like a full name with the surname, but she technically has no family name in the Western sense.
So how does it work?
It's essentially a composite. It's a tribute to three foundational family members. Aung San is from her father, the national hero.
Of course.
Suu comes from her paternal grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and Kyi is from her mother, King Kyi. So her name is, in a way, a biographical roadmap. It's her entire legacy embedded in her identity.
That's fascinating. It's like she carries her lineage with her in every mention. And for anyone who follows news from Myanmar, you'll often hear her referred to with these specific honorifics.
Yes, absolutely. In any formal context, it's almost always Da Aung San Suu Kyi. Da gets translated as aunt or madam, but really it's a deeply respectful title for an older, revered woman.
And then there's the more personal one,
The one her supporters use, Amai Suu.
which means Mother Sue.
Mother Sue. And that simple moniker that says so much about the emotional connection, the loyalty she commanded from so many people. It's that loyalty that made her such a threat to the military for decades.
And it's what eventually propelled her party to that huge victory.
It was a political asset almost unmatched anywhere else in the world. But to really get the weight of that name, we have to start at the very beginning with the legacy she was born into.
Okay, let's do that. Part 1, Foundations and Early Activism. So we're covering 1945 through 1988. She was born in Rangoon, British Burma, June 19th, 1945. So right at the end of World War II, just as independence is on the horizon.
And she is born directly into the heart of that story because of her father, Aung San. He is, as we said, the father of the nation of modern-day Myanmar. He's the architect of independence from Britain. But his story is cut tragically short.
He's assassinated. She was only 2 years old.
Just two. The assassination happened in 1947, only 6 months before independence was actually finalized. So she grows up her entire life in the shadow of this martyred hero, never really knowing him, but constantly living up to his legend.
And that must have given her a kind of political legitimacy that was just untouchable.
Exactly. It gave her this powerful counter-narrative to the military dictatorships that came later, because they claimed to be the heirs to the revolution.
She was the legacy.
She was the living legacy. And that, right there, is the primary source of the military's fear of her.
So, with her father gone, her mother, King Kyi, becomes the central figure in her life, and she was a pretty formidable person herself.
Oh, absolutely. King Kyi was a social activist, politically active, and she went on to represent Burma on the world stage. In 1960, she was appointed the Burmese ambassador to India and Nepal.
Which is what leads to Suu Kyi's early international exposure. She follows her mother to New Delhi.
Right. But even before that, back home, she was already getting a very strong academic foundation. She was at the Methodist English High School, and even then people noted her talent for languages.
She speaks quite a few, doesn't she?
Burmese, English with that very distinct British accent, but she later added French and Japanese. And that fluency, that comfort in Western diplomatic circles would become so important later when she becomes the face of the democracy movement.
So living abroad, it really shapes her worldview, leading to her higher education.
After New Delhi, she went on to the University of Delhi, got a degree in politics in '64, and then she moves to England, to St. Hugh's College at Oxford.
Studying philosophy, politics, and economics, the classic training ground for so many world leaders.
Exactly. And that immersion in Western democratic thought is crucial. It gives her the political framework she would later try to apply back in Myanmar.
And she even worked for a time in the U.S., right? At the UN.
Yes, for 3 years in New York.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is what she did there. It wasn't high-level diplomacy or human rights. Her focus was on budget matters, internal administration.
That's surprising. It shows a very different side to her, a technical administrative capability that sort of contrasts with the later image of this ethereal moral icon.
It does. And it's during this international period that she meets, and in 1972, marries Michael Aris. He was a scholar of Tibetan culture. And this relationship, this marriage, while being a source of great personal support, would become the central, agonizing point of leverage the dictatorship used against her.
It's the deepest personal tragedy woven into her political story. They had two sons, Alexander and Kim, but the family was torn apart when she returned to Burma in 1988.
She went back to care for her ailing mother, fully expecting it to be a temporary trip. But then the political situation just explodes, and she stays.
And the military immediately weaponizes her family. The fact that her husband and sons were foreign citizens.
Precisely. Michael Aris's last visit to her was Christmas of 1995. After that, the Tatmadaw, the military, refused him any more entry visas. They knew that by isolating her from her family, they were forcing an impossible choice on her: your country or your family.
The true horror of that choice really comes to a head in 1997.
Aris was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. And despite this just avalanche of international appeals from the U.S. government, from the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, even Pope John Paul II, the Tatmadaw, refused him a visa.
But they made her an offer.
A deeply cynical one. They told her she was free to leave Burma to go visit her dying husband abroad.
And she refused. She knew if she left, she'd never be allowed back in.
It was a well-established tactic they used against all political opponents. If she had left, she would have effectively abdicated her role as the head of the democracy movement. Her refusal to leave was a brutally cold, but from a strategic standpoint, a necessary political calculation.
It cemented her status as a martyr in the eyes of her people.
It transformed her personal sacrifice into a political weapon against the junta. He died in March 1999 on his 53rd birthday. He hadn't seen his wife in over 3 years.
And she was just left there, alone in Burma. It's an unimaginable sacrifice.
And she later reflected on it, saying that while the separation from her husband was agonizing, the greater sacrifice was giving up, seeing her sons grow up. But she always tried to contextualize her pain within the broader suffering of the nation, pleading to colleagues in prison facing far worse.
This whole personal tragedy, it's the backdrop for her political birth, which, as you said, was almost accidental. She went back in '88 for purely family reasons.
Purely. To care for her mother, who'd had a stroke. But her arrival just happens to coincide with the resignation of the longtime military dictator, General Ne Win. And that resignation unleashes this national explosion of discontent.
The '88 uprising.
Correct. Mass demonstrations for democracy erupt across the country, starting on August 8, 1988. For a moment, it really looks like a popular revolution might actually succeed.
But the Tatmadaw, the armed forces, respond with brutal force.
They violently suppress the movement. Thousands are killed. Martial law is imposed. It's a bloodbath.
And her lineage, her timing, it just thrusts her to the forefront.
She's instantly seen as the natural leader. She makes her first public appearance on August 24th. And then just 2 days later, she gives this landmark speech to 500 million people at the Shwedagon Pagoda, calling for a democratic government.
Which was an incredibly brave thing to do, given what had just happened.
Audacious. And she quickly channels that moral authority into a political structure. She helps found the National League for Democracy, the NLD, on September 27th.
And her guiding philosophy for this movement is very clear from the start.
Absolutely. The sources really highlight this. She was deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence and also by core Buddhist concepts.
So that early framing is all about pure, peaceful, moral resistance against this overwhelming military force.
And the world absolutely embraced that narrative. They saw her as the embodiment of peaceful democratic resolve. The Nobel Committee later cited her extraordinary example of civil courage.
And Time magazine called her one of the children of Gandhi.
It was the perfect positioning. She became the spiritual successor to the world's great nonviolent leaders.
Yep.
And that heroic, almost saintly image is what defined her for the next 20 years.
Which sets the stage perfectly for part two. Isolation and international acclaim, covering the years from 1989 to 2010. This is the era of her iconic house arrest.
And it begins very quickly. She's detained on July 20th, 1989. The military realized they couldn't just kill her. The international reaction would be too severe, so they decided to neutralize her by isolating her.
They offered her a deal, though.
The same deal. They told her she could be free if she just agreed to leave the country, and her refusal was, again, just a brilliant political move. It showed she was committed.
And yet, even with her under house arrest, the NLD was strong enough to contest the 1990 general election.
This was a huge miscalculation by the junta.
Yeah.
They held the election, probably believing their own propaganda, thinking that their repression would guarantee a victory for their party.
They were wrong.
They were catastrophically wrong. The results shocked them, and they shocked the world. The NLD won an overwhelming mandate.
How big a victory was it?
It was a landslide. They took 81% of the seats in parliament, 59% of the popular vote. It was an undeniable, clear electoral victory. The NLD had the right to form a government, and she should have become prime minister.
But the military just said no.
They just nullified the result. They refused to hand over power. And this act, this blatant theft of an election, triggered immediate international outcry and really solidified Aung San Suu Kyi's image as the rightful leader being denied power by these brutal dictators.
And all while she's under house arrest, it's during this isolation that her international fame just explodes.
The awards start pouring in. It's a way for the world to legitimize her cause. In 1990, she gets the Sakharov Prize.
And then the big one.
The Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. And her sons, Alexander and Kim, accepted on her behalf. It was this incredibly poignant moment that just gave a human face to her sacrifice.
The prize came with a substantial amount of money. What did she do with that?
She used the whole amount, about $1.3 million, to establish a health and education trust for the Burmese people.
So not for the party, not for political activities.
No, it was explicitly for public welfare. It just reinforced that image of her as a leader who was completely dedicated to her people, not to personal or political gain.
Now, let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which is really crucial for understanding what comes later. Her view on nonviolence. The world saw her as a moral leader, but she saw it differently.
Yes, this is a critical point. While the world saw this Gandhian moral purity, she saw a strategic advantage. She even said it explicitly in 2007. She said, "I do not hold to nonviolence for moral reasons, but for political and practical reasons."
So it was a tactic, not a core belief.
It suggests she was always a political realist, a strategist, first and foremost. She wasn't a secular saint. She chose nonviolence because it was the most effective tool she had.
How so?
Well, it garnered that crucial international support. It minimized casualties when confronting the heavily armed Tamada, and it provided the strongest possible moral contrast to the sheer brutality of the military regime. It was simply the best weapon the powerless had against the powerful.
But her very existence, even under house arrest, was a threat to the military, and the danger she was in wasn't just symbolic. There were physical attacks on her.
Yes, the sources outline a clear pattern of military-backed violence designed to intimidate or even eliminate her. The first big one was in November 1996. She was in her motorcade with other NLD leaders, and they were ambushed by a mob of about 200 men.
This wasn't a spontaneous protest?
No, it was organized by the military-backed USDA. The men had metal chains, batons. They smashed the car windows. Later reports suggested they were paid about 50 cents each to do it. The NLD filed a complaint, but of course nothing happened.
Plausible deniability for the military, but then came the much deadlier attack in 2003, the Depain massacre.
This was a far more serious attempt on her life. On May 30th, 2003, another government-sponsored mob ambushed her caravan in a village up north. This was incredibly violent. At least 70 NLD supporters were killed or wounded.
How did she manage to get out of that alive?
She escaped with her driver, but the Tamada were waiting for her down the road. They arrested her, sent her to insane prison for a short time, and then she's put back under house arrest. It showed that her isolation wasn't just about political control. Sometimes it was for her own survival, though it was orchestrated by the very regime that claimed to be protecting her.
And over this whole period, how long was she actually detained?
It's staggering when you add it all up. She spent almost 15 of the 21 years between 1989 and 2010 under house arrest, just confined to her family home on University Avenue.
What was the military's official reason for holding her that long?
Oh, it was classic authoritarian doublespeak. They ignored the UN's ruling that her detention was illegal. Instead, the Burmese authorities claimed they were being magnanimous and that she wasn't arrested at all, but was merely taken into protective custody for her own safety.
Protecting her from the mobs they themselves were organizing.
Precisely.
Now, let's talk about one of the most bizarre episodes from this period, which the military used to extend her sentence: the trespass incident.
It is almost absurd. In May 2009, this American man, John Yedaw, swims across Inya Lake to her house. He used homemade fins and a water bottle as a float.
And he had a very strange reason for doing this.
He said he had a divine vision, that he needed to warn her that she was going to be assassinated. He ends up staying at her house for 2 days before they catch him trying to swim back.
And the government seized on this, didn't they? They blamed her for the intrusion.
Immediately. It was a perfect pretext. They charged her with violating the terms of her house arrest by letting him stay, and they sentenced her to 3 years of hard labor.
That timing was very convenient.
It was perfectly calculated. The sentence was quickly commuted to 18 more months of house arrest, which just so happened to guarantee she would be locked away during the upcoming 2010 elections.
So this bizarre incident with a random American swimmer was the key to neutralizing her for their next political maneuver.
And the international reaction was furious. The UN Security Council, President Obama, everyone condemned it. It became a whole diplomatic incident. Eventually, U.S. Senator Jim Webb flew over and negotiated Yedaw's release. But the whole affair just shows how desperate the military was to use any excuse, no matter how flimsy, to keep her out of the picture.
Which brings us to part 3, the ascent to de facto leadership from 2010 to 2016. After all this time, the regime finally lets her go.
Her house arrest is lifted on November 13, 2010. And again, the timing is critical. This is just 6 days after a general election.
An election the NLD boycotted.
Right. They believed the whole process was rigged, so they sat it out, which meant the military-backed party, the USDP, won in a predictable landslide.
So they only let her out after they've secured their power through a flawed election.
As a controlled transition, they release her, thinking her international fame will lend some legitimacy to their new system, while her party is on the sidelines. But the public response to her release was just overwhelming. Huge crowds rushed to her house the moment the barricades came down.
And she had a personal reunion as well.
Yes, her son, Kim Aris, who hadn't seen her in 10 years, was finally given a visa. That personal moment of healing became a symbol of hope for national reconciliation.
So now she has this big strategic decision to make. Does the NLD stay outside the system in opposition, or do they re-engage with this new framework the military has built?
They chose to re-engage. In November 2011, the NLD announced they would re-register as a political party. They realized that boycotting the 2010 election had basically made them irrelevant. To change anything, they had to be in the game, even if it was a rigged game.
And that leads to the 2012 by-elections. This is her first time actually running for office.
Yes. In January 2012, she runs for a seat in the lower house. Her campaign platform was very clear: reform the 2008 Constitution, get rid of restrictive laws, and establish an independent judiciary.
But even campaigning in this new, supposedly more open system was difficult.
Oh, absolutely. When her campaign speech was broadcast on state TV, they censored the part where she talked about the Tatmadaws' repression. She also publicly called out irregularities in the voter lists. Dead people still on the rolls, eligible voters missing. She was warning the world that the cheating was still happening.
But despite all that, the result was another landslide.
The NLD won 43 of the 45 seats that were up for grabs. It was another clear sign of her incredible popularity. She becomes the official leader of the opposition. But then she's faced with an immediate problem.
The oath of office.
Yes. The Constitution required every MP to swear an oath to safeguard the Constitution. But the NLD's entire goal was to reform that very Constitution, especially the parts that locked in the military's power.
So they were trapped. A choice between sticking to their principles and actually having a voice in Parliament.
And they chose influence. On May 2, 2012, the NLD took the oath. Their reasoning was that they could do more from inside the system than by shouting from the outside. And this moment, this is really the beginning of her transition from a figure of pure moral opposition to one of pragmatic political compromise.
And now that she's in the system, she can finally travel. She can accept all those awards she won while in isolation.
In June 2012, 21 years late, she gives her Nobel acceptance speech in Oslo. It was an incredibly powerful moment. Later that year, she receives the U.S. Congressional Gold Medal at the White House. It was the completion of that heroic narrative for the international community.
And all this momentum carries her straight into the 2015 general election. But the military had a built-in trap for her in the Constitution, a way to stop her from ever becoming president.
That was Section 59 of the 2008 Constitution. And it's so specific, it's clear who it was written for. It says that anyone whose spouse or children are foreign citizens cannot become president.
So even if the NLD won by a million miles, she was legally blocked from the top job.
It was the military's veto power, baked right into the system. But the election results, again, showed the people's will. The NLD won a sweeping victory, getting more than the supermajority they needed to choose the president themselves.
And she was very clear about who would really be in charge.
She said it publicly, "I will be above the president." She promised she would hold the real power. The next challenge was figuring out how to do that legally.
And the NLD got creative.
At first, she just took on 4 ministerial posts at once: foreign affairs, president's office, education, and energy, just to show her influence. But the real structural fix came in April 2016 when Parliament created a brand new role, State Counsellor of Myanmar.
A role designed specifically for her, basically a prime minister.
Exactly. It gave her the authority to coordinate the government, to be the de facto leader she promised she would be. But, and this is so important to remember for what comes next, she was still governing inside a cage that the military had built.
Let's talk more about that cage. What were the specific parts of the 2008 Constitution that limited her power, even as state counselor?
There were 2 non-negotiable pillars of military authority. First, the Tatmadaw was guaranteed 25% of the seats in Parliament. They didn't have to win them. They were just given to them.
And that's enough to block any changes to the Constitution.
It's a veto. Any amendment needs more than 75% of the vote, so they could block anything they didn't like. She could never constitutionally remove their power.
And the second pillar.
They kept total control over 3 crucial ministries: defense, home affairs, and border affairs. And having the home affairs ministry is key because that gives you control of the police, the bureaucracy, the intelligence services. It means the military decides who gets arrested.
So she had civilian authority, but the military always had the real institutional power.
Always. And that context is everything as we move into part 4. The paradoxical tenure from 2016 to 2021. This is where the moral icon collides with the brutal reality of governing, and where her fall from grace begins.
Her first move seemed promising, though.
Yes, she granted amnesty to student protesters. She announced a commission to look into the problems in Rakhine State, acknowledging the long-persecuted Rohingya minority.
But the situation in Rakhine State escalates very quickly, and the international community goes from admiring her to condemning her for her refusal to act, or even acknowledge the violence from the Tatmadaw.
This is where her pragmatism, that idea of nonviolence as a tactic, collides with a massive moral crisis. After attacks by a Rohingya militant group, ARSA, in 2017, the Tatmadaw launched what they called clearance operations,
Which the rest of the world called ethnic cleansing.
It was described as one of the biggest refugee crises and cases of ethnic cleansing since the Second World War, and the world looked to the Nobel laureate, Aung San Suu Kyi, to do something, and they were met with silence, or worse, deflection.
Why? What was the political calculation there?
The brutal reality was that the majority Burmese Buddhist population in Myanmar largely supported the military's actions. They see the Rohingya as illegal immigrants. For her to maintain her domestic political support and avoid a direct confrontation with the military, she chose to side with that nationalist sentiment.
This wasn't a new position for her, though, was it?
No, the signs were there much earlier. Back in 2012, she said she didn't even know if the Rohingya could be considered Burmese citizens. In 2013, she denied there was ethnic cleansing, and she blamed the tensions on a climate of fear about global Muslim power.
That must have been shocking for her Western supporters to hear.
It was devastating. There's that story about her 2013 BBC interview with Michelle Hussein. After being challenged on the violence, Suu Kyi was reportedly furious, specifically because she had been interviewed by a Muslim journalist. It showed a worrying level of bias, or at least a willingness to cater to it.
And she actively tried to erase their identity, asking diplomats not to even use the word Rohingya.
Right. In 2016, she asked the U.S. ambassador not to use the term. The government insists on calling them Bengali, to frame them as foreigners. By doing that, she was reinforcing the military's narrative and denying the community their own identity.
The condemnation from her own peers, from other Nobel laureates, was swift and harsh.
Desmond Tutu called it a shameful betrayal. Malala Yousafzai pleaded with Mother Sue to speak out. The UN Special Rapporteur basically said the leader of the country needed to protect everyone in the country. It was a clear rebuke.
But the ultimate act of alignment with the military came when she went to the International Court of Justice.
This was the moment the icon truly died for the international community. In December 2019, she personally went to The Hague to defend the Burmese military against charges of genocide. She used her entire global reputation, which she built opposing the military, to defend the military.
What was her argument? How does she justify their actions?
She basically dismissed the allegations as incomplete and misleading. She argued it was a complex internal conflict, a military response to the ARSA attacks. She talked about internal investigations being opened up.
She avoided the word genocide.
And she avoided the word Rohingya. She stuck to the government's narrative, even on the world stage.
But her whole defense was undermined by the fact that her government was blocking UN investigators from even entering Rakhine State.
Exactly. The internal investigations she was talking about were widely seen as a sham, designed to rubber stamp the military's innocence. By defending them, she was choosing institutional loyalty over truth.
And the court's ruling in January 2020 didn't go her way.
No, it was a huge blow. The court ruled there was a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to the Rohingya. It ordered the government to take all measures to protect them and preserve evidence. It was a direct rejection of her defense.
And this moment, her defending the military, it triggered this wave of her former allies, stripping her of all the honors they had given her.
This is a really powerful part of the story, the visible dismantling of her icon status. It was the world sending a clear message that the moral authority she once had was gone.
Let's run through some of them because the list is just staggering.
It starts in 2017. The Oxford City Council takes back the Freedom of the City Award, saying she was no longer worthy of the honor.
Bob Geldof made a very public statement.
He returned his Freedom of the City of Dublin Award, calling her a handmaiden to genocide. And then the Dublin City Council followed suit and revoked their award too.
The rejections from human rights organizations must have hit even harder.
In March 2018, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum took back the Elie Wiesel Award. Then Canada revoked her honorary citizenship, saying they believed a genocide had occurred.
And finally, Amnesty International, the very group that campaigned for her freedom for years.
In November 2018, Amnesty International revoked its Ambassador of Conscience Award. They called it a shameful betrayal of the values she once claimed to stand for. It was a complete and total repudiation.
And this moral decay wasn't just about the Rohingya. It extended to the free press, didn't it? The case of the Reuters journalists.
This is a devastating chapter for someone who was supposed to be a democracy leader. In December 2017, two Reuters journalists, Walon and Kayosou, were arrested while investigating the Indin massacre, one of the key atrocities in Rakhine.
And she didn't protect them. She defended their prosecution.
Publicly, she said they were arrested for breaking the Official Secrets Act, not for their journalism. She even defended their 7-year prison sentence.
Then a police officer testified that he was ordered to entrap them.
Exactly. It proved it was a frame-up. And then the American diplomat, Bill Richardson, revealed that when he raised the issue with her privately, she got angry and called the journalists traitors. It just showed this profound intolerance for a free press.
The irony is just staggering. The UN itself reported that under her NLD government, press freedom was getting worse.
Yes. A UN report noted that the arrests and prosecutions of journalists had made it impossible for them to do their job without fear or favor. The government, led by the democracy icon, was using the same oppressive tactics as the military she supposedly fought against.
So this dissent, driven by fear of losing power and the constraints of the system, brings us full circle to her final detention. Part 5, the final political detainment from 2021 to today.
The ultimate proof that the military was always in control came on February 1st, 2021. The Tatmadaw launched a coup, and Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested, along with the rest of the NLD leadership.
Their justification was the same old story. Claims of fraud in the November 2020 election, which the NLD had, again, won by a landslide.
Despite that clear mandate, the military just decided to tear the whole system down, and the charges they filed against her were straight out of their old playbook.
Starting with the absurd.
The very first charge was for illegally importing 10 or more walkie-talkies. It was a ridiculous esoteric charge designed to let them hold her while they cooked up the more serious stuff.
And the serious charges came thick and fast, creating this legal cage designed to keep her out of politics forever.
Exactly. They charged her with sedition, violating the Official Secrets Act, breaking COVID-19 rules, and the trials were a complete sham. Closed to the public, no observers. A courtroom circus, as critics called it.
Let's just trace the sentencing. It's relentless.
It was methodical. In December 2021, she gets 4 years for inciting dissent and COVID violations, which is then reduced to 2.
Then the walkie-talkie charge comes back.
January 2022, another 4 years for the walkie-talkies, but then they move to the real political weapon, corruption charges. April 2022, she gets 5 years for corruption. This is how authoritarians disqualify their rivals permanently.
And the charges just keep piling up.
August 2022, 6 more years for corruption, taking the total to 17 years. September, another 6 years for election fraud and state secrets, taking it to 23 years.
Until they finally reach the end of the process at the end of 2022.
The trials end on December 30th, 2022, with a final corruption conviction. The grand total comes to 33 years in prison. The whole world condemned it as a politically motivated show trial.
There was a moment in 2023 where it seemed like things might be easing up slightly.
On August 1st, 2023, the junta granted a partial pardon, reducing her sentence to 27 years. And there were reports she'd been moved from prison to a VIP government house.
But that didn't last.
No. By September, reports said she was back in prison. And worse, there were now severe health concerns, a heart condition, a debilitating toothache that makes it hard for her to eat. And crucially, her requests to see a dentist were reportedly denied. It's a return to that same brutal disregard for her welfare.
The level of uncertainty around her now is chilling. It feels like the old days before 2010.
It's worse. In December 2025, her son, Kim Aris, made a public statement that was deeply worrying. He said the family hasn't heard from her directly since 2023. All information is controlled by the junta. And he expressed this genuine fear that for all they know, she could be dead already.
So we end in this place of profound tragedy. A woman whose life was this global symbol of hope is now back in total isolation, possibly facing death at the hands of the very military she tried to govern.
It's the final confirmation that the Tatmadaw was always in control.
So where does this leave us? Let's get to our synthesis, our final takeaway for you, the learner. There's a quote often attributed to Aung San Suu Kyi herself that seems to capture the whole story.
The quote is, "It is not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it, and fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it."
Her early struggle was a perfect example of the first part of that. The military junta corrupted by their fear of losing power. But her later years, the silence on the Rohingya, defending the military, the crackdown on journalists, it all suggests she too was corrupted by the fear of losing the little power she had.
That is the unavoidable paradox of her legacy. Her reputation as an icon of nonviolence was shattered by the brutal realities of governing a system that was rigged against her. And her international condemnation, the revocation of all those honors, that all happened before her final arrest.
She spent decades fighting for democracy, sacrificing her family, only to be imprisoned again by the same military whose worst actions she felt she had to defend on the world stage.
And this is so important. She once said that because Myanmar was so far behind, it had an advantage. It could learn from the mistakes of other countries transitioning to democracy, like South Africa or those in Eastern Europe.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. Something to reflect on as you think about her entire complex story.
Given the cage she was in, that 25% military veto, their control of the key ministries, and given her ultimate fate, back in prison, in isolation, her health failing, what lessons can we actually draw from her story about the cost of maintaining political power in a system that's designed to never really let go? Is her story an inevitable tragedy of institutional failure, or is it a profound tragedy of moral compromise?
That balance between moral principle and political pragmatism, that is the definitive, haunting question of her entire life. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complex and truly tragic trajectory of Aung San Suu Kyi.
We really encourage you to continue exploring the sources and the ongoing situation in Myanmar.
Until next time.